Thank you so much for joining us. We've reached the top of the hour and it's time to start our workshop on the human element in disruptive technology. Thanks for joining us. Before we move ahead, just a quick note about safety for our virtual meeting. Wherever you are listening from, please know the following at your location: emergency phone numbers, your location, your take cover and evacuation alarms and routes, any room hazards you may need to be cautious of. Please also be aware of your surroundings, and in your location, please know who will call emergency numbers, perform CPR, retrieve and use the AED, and any fire extinguishers in the case of an emergency. As we conduct this meeting, as with all of our meetings at Caterpillar, please remember to be safe, to be present, and to win the right way. Before we begin, here are just a few quick attendee guidelines. You will be muted throughout the presentation, but you can still stay engaged throughout the presentation with our question and answer feature. Please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box throughout the presentation. We'll have a question and answer session at the end of this presentation. Also, a recording of this presentation will be made available following the event. Please feel free to email the presenter with any follow-up questions you may have. Thank you so much again for joining us for our virtual workshop. That's enough for me. I'm going to turn the floor over to Brett for a presentation on the human element in disruptive technology. Actually, before I begin, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to Brett. Brett Haskins is a certified safety professional with more than 25 years of experience working with executives to frontline employees. While serving customers in North and South America, Australia, Southeast Asia, and Europe, Brett has successfully established and sustained management systems and culture excellence within the mining, manufacturing, construction, heavy equipment, and pipeline industries. All right, it's time to turn over the floor to Brett. Thank you, Brett.
Thank you very much, Laura. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you might be in the world. Thank you very much for joining this webinar today. I'd like to start by saying in 1789, in a letter written to Jean-Baptiste Leroy, Benjamin Franklin made the statement, or wrote the statement: "In this world, nothing can be certain but death and taxes." Let's fast forward to 2020, to today's time, and I'd probably suggest that we might add technology to that list. Nothing can be certain but death, taxes, and technology. Experts state that we will see more change over the next 5 to 10 years than we have seen over the last 50 years. Mark Cutifani, also CEO of Anglo American from Australian Mining News, made this statement. Said, "Our challenge is clear. We need to do things differently to find new, safer, more sustainable and cost-effective ways to supply essential raw materials to meet the needs of a rapidly growing and urbanizing global population for decades to come." Mark stated that Anglo American's aim was to transform their physical and their social footprint, and that the company is committed to ensuring the introduction of new technologies and that it's managed responsibly and it has a positive impact not only on the environment but also in the communities to which they operate. And with those technologies, the intent of today is we talk about the human elements that apply to the introduction of such technologies. The people, the leadership, and the culture, and the complex interplay that is between the three. We've seen that when we get all three right, we can achieve amazing things. When we don't, we limit our success. Disruptive technology, the definition that I pulled, an innovation that significantly alters the way that customers, industries, or businesses operate. A disruptive technology sweeps away the systems or habits it replaces because it has attributes that are recognizably superior. My experience with disruptive technology began many years ago As Laura stated, I'm a certified safety professional. I've been working in the safety industry, the safety field in various manufacturing, construction, mining, consulting industries over the years. But back in the mid-90s, I was first introduced to disruptive technologies through the use of safety technologies such as light curtains for machine guarding, lasers that would move automatic trays and loading and unloading facilities, robots that began to weld metal, sheet metal, and create and manufacture certain metal products versus having a physical employee weld those products. And so the introduction and the disruption that those things had early in my career made me recognize and realize that managing those changes are very, very important, and ensuring that the human element in those change is something that we laser focus on, because the landscape has not only changed since the mid-90s, it's continuing to change, as stated earlier. So I'd like to ask a question to those of you that are attending, and I'm going to, if you would use the Q&A function in the presentation, and Laura, if you would be able to read any responses that we have. But what are some examples of technologies that that are being used in your operation today? I'll give you a few minutes to respond. Okay, Laura.
All right, it looks like we have a question that came, or an example that came in. Someone wrote that they sometimes see resistance from the workforce when a disruptive technology comes in.
Okay. All right. It's most. Go ahead, Laura.
No, that's good. Go ahead.
Most definitely. It's one of the things from a former change management perspective. Identifying the resistance was something that has been done, focused on very heavily over the years. Is how will people respond to that change? Are there any others, Laura?
Yep, there actually is. So someone else wrote in disengagement.
Yes, resistance leads to disengagement, right? If I don't understand the change and I don't feel the change is beneficial to me, I can easily disengage from seeing that change driven throughout my organization. And if I don't feel I'm a part of it, then I definitely can disengage.
We had a couple examples come in. Someone talked about or wrote about a loss of talent. So either maybe in anticipation or as a result of a new disruptive technology.
Yeah, our experience shows us that some people will accept the change, and some people, no matter what you do, don't want to work in an environment that change has occurred or that technology has been implemented. If it changes the way they work, some people just can't get on board. And so it's definitely things that we see through some of the other common aches and pains that we've seen through deployment of disruptive technologies and what we've experienced with some of our customers. They tend to lead to an increased erosion of the culture as well. So thanks for those that responded, but you can see that we've got loss of talent that's listed. There are others, the resistance that employees often can provide toward that, rejection of the system. Even though the system might appear to be better, the information provided might state that it's better. Some people just can't handle the change in that environment. And also technology oftentimes today provides us much more than it did when I first started in the mid-90s. It provides us access to a lot of data that we've never seen before, a lot more information that we've never had. And sometimes there's lots of questions around how that data is used. What are we doing with that data? Unless we're clear and honest about how the data is used, then it can often lead to additional resistance, additional loss of talent, additional common aches and pains that you might see in your organization. It's happened to us. You've given us a little bit about your journey. We'd like to reflect on ours a little bit too. We've had several changes throughout Caterpillar over the years. I've had several changes throughout my career over the years. That the impact, as we looked at it, and we had these grand ideas of this change. We looked at the projected results as we went through an analysis of what it was going to bring and benefit our business, how it was going to improve our operations. We thought that employees would definitely accept this new change because it's going to be better. And in our minds, it was better. But in the minds of those that were responsible for implementing the change, it wasn't necessarily better in their mind. The reality is it's also often a massive tug of war that occurs amongst those that are responsible for implementing the change. Leaders are pulling one direction, employees are pulling another direction. Sometimes the middle level of your organization doesn't know what direction they need to pull. And so sometimes that tug of war can linger longer than anticipated. Sometimes it can linger through the entire life cycle of the project. And ultimately, sometimes it never goes away. And it's often due to the fact that change, especially technology changes, are bigger than they seem. They have deeper roots, than they go different places, and they reach further than we ever thought that they might reach. It reaches more people than we thought. It's not just the people that are necessarily directly impacted by the change, but there's other people also within your organization or that support your organization. There are processes and the way that different departments communicate and interact with each other that change due to a technology that we didn't anticipate. Systems, processes, procedures, other things that can just continue to multiply exponentially and make the change more difficult than what it seemed. We might need to engage vendors. We might need to engage suppliers. We might have to change the way we educate contractors and be able to bring them up to speed, inform and train them on how to work in this new way. We might have to change our parts ordering processes, our stock and our inventory requirements. As you can see, the roots can go way beyond what we originally imagined. So we have to decide who goes where, when, how, why. We have to ask ourselves those questions on and on throughout the project lifecycle. Because the strategy sometimes is misaligned with the tactical reality. We can certainly we can plan on the installation of the technology itself, the physical devices, whatever that might be. We can plan the beta testing. We can plan dry runs. We can plan the changes to processes and systems, the ins and outs of those devices. Maybe there's different maintenance processes that are impacted, and modifications of our procedures and go live dates. But oftentimes we miss things. And to achieve ultimate success with the change and move from our current state to the desired state, we have to include them all. How will our people adopt and adapt to the change? How will our leaders change the way they lead? Should they change the way they lead? Does leadership look different in this new way of working than it did in the old way of working? And if that's required, how do we set leaders up for success? How will our various teams interact with each other in this new reality? How will we use these three in expecting and providing us the expected return on our investment? Those are all questions that we've asked ourselves, that you've probably asked yourselves. And the reality is usually we do a pretty good job at the technology itself, the physical devices and the systems and processes that are attached directly to that technology. But despite knowing that it takes people, that it takes leaders, that it takes a culture to help make successful, those two elements or those three elements are often neglected. We miss a great opportunity because those groups are the most responsible for ensuring the success or even supporting the change. As Mark, the CEO of Anglo American, he said, it's not only our people, but it's also the communities in which we work. We have to ensure that our changes, the technology we do, that we have to assess how does it impact our community. And oftentimes people feel that change is being done to them rather than with them. A mining technology manager recently stated that disruptive technologies are changing not only our world of work, but how we function in society at large. Yet the consideration of the human impact lags far behind the economic benefit it brings. I'm reminded of automation in cars and even automation in airplanes. I think planes have been able to fly themselves for several years, but there are no commercial flights available now that don't have a pilot and a co-pilot because of the impact that the human resistance, the impact, the thoughts, the questions, the hows, the whats, the whys, all need to be considered and brought to the forefront. So let's talk a little bit about what we've learned at Caterpillar and what we're doing about it. There's much to be said about the results that a quality solution and systems can bring, but it's the people that get the results. And you've heard the statement, a leader is nothing without their people. I would say the same can be said for technology and change, that it's really nothing without the people. People are the ones that make it work. And by deeply integrating them into the technology deployments, we can see results that even surpass our expectations. We have to identify the risk in our people, not just the project risk, the business risk, and the product risk, but also the risk in our people. And really, change management is a game of hearts and minds. Here's our definition at Caterpillar. It's intention of developing a strategy that accelerates people through a change using the two most important motivators, logic and emotion. I stated earlier that older change management strategies focused attention around resistance that would occur due to the change, while newer thinking suggests that logic and emotion of the human brain are the most powerful motivators that lead to adoption of a change. Research shows that 95% of the time our brains work behind the curtain in the memory center. And at only 5% of the time we are consciously aware, logical, and rational creatures. So we have to work really hard to grab a hold of that 5% and capture it to be able to create logical reasons that this change is good. And yes, we are emotional creatures, whether we like it or not. We make many decisions out of emotions. I do. I can't speak for you, but I know I do. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. But some of the best ones that we make are out of emotions. Yet the power and the value of emotions to adopt change is often underplayed when it comes to change management and technology deployments. For change to stick, we have to engage the whole person, the heart and the mind. We must engage them as they see they need to be engaged. And these hearts and minds, this needs to support our strategic intent. As you can see, a kind of a process below, a define, design, deliver, and drive that moves us from current to future state. It's the why, the how, the what, and the when across the entire life cycle needs to be outlined, from defining the change to identifying the new way we work. Too often the information provided includes what the change is, who is impacted, how wonderful it's going to be, but it neglects the use of people to ensure the success. And we know from change experts that information alone is not enough. But if we can engage the hearts and minds of the people and help them identify what's in it for them, we can make greater strides to the acceptance of the change. And it has to be enabled through your culture. The question is your culture working for you or is it working against you? What's your history? I know in our experience as we work with organizations through change and changing some of their processes and procedures, and even working through helping change their culture, understanding where the culture is and and what the history of the organization and the industry and the leadership, all of those things matter because it all has an impact on change. Engagement plays a big part. that employees feel that they've been engaged in the change rather than it's being forced on them. And through cultural assessments, you really can understand where we are. We often say that prescription without diagnosis is malpractice. So really understanding where you are with the current state and how your culture can help you or hinder you along the journey is very important. And here's what we know. Sometimes it's the heart more than the mind. As I stated earlier, we are emotional creatures and we make decisions many times out of emotions. And this is kind of a typical change curve that you've probably experienced yourself. Think back to a change that has occurred in your life, whether it's personal, whether it's work, whether it's a technology that was implemented at work, or whether it's a technology that you implemented at home, or maybe it was a new cell phone that you got and it was a complete, maybe you switched from Apple to Android or vice versa. How did that change? It was, there were emotions involved. I don't want to learn a new system. I don't want to do this, right? There's shock in this numbness stage, and then there's suffering through the understanding and reasoning through the process. We go through those emotional reactions, and we will do it differently despite our best efforts. What we've found, though, is how you facilitate that change to get to the resolution and the ultimate acceptance of the change. It can lessen the blow. It's a personal thing, how we facilitate it personally, but also how we facilitate it for others. It's not uncommon to move backwards and forwards, back and forth between these different stages of the change curve. It's not a linear process. And it's often associated with what people stand to lose. If we stand to lose something, it generally generates some emotion within our hearts and our minds too. Those that feel they have more to lose are typically the least responsive. Be careful not to underestimate the impact of even the smallest change. Nuclear power, oil and gas, and chemical industries are probably the best in the world at not underestimating the smallest of change, due to the fact that the slightest of change can have significant impacts not only to their people, their processes, their organization, but also to the communities in which they work. Within our own hearts, there's a tendency for us to focus on the things that we can lose. But rather than preventing our emotions and trying to avoid the emotional aspect, we can embrace them and explore them using an approach that allows all sides to be heard. Here's a little tip and trick that I learned from a colleague of mine. It's called the 4 doors of change. And you can use it to identify how people are feeling just by asking them these simple 4 questions. What are the things that we could do and still can do? How are things staying the same? What are the things we couldn't do and we still cannot do? What's staying the same with this change? And then uncovering what's being made different. What are the things we could and now cannot do? And what are the things we couldn't do, but now we can do? If the change in the hearts and minds, this little tool, if the change is about hearts and minds, this little tool can help you uncover what's in it for the people. We talked a little bit earlier about the brain. In reality, our brain loves predictability. We are creatures of habit, and we're also social. Not only are we emotional, but we are also socially wired. So our job is to work. Our job as leaders and our job as change agents is to work with the brain, the thing that we can't unwire, to work with it to help it adapt to the change. Here's an example of a change that kind of proves the point that we're socially wired. Remember back when hotels, those of you that travel a lot or in and out of hotels, when they started asking you to not wash your linens or your towels, to reuse them. When that process started, that people were asked, why would you do this? And in order from most important to least important, you see on the slide: protect the environment, benefit society. We want to help people save money. But last, but I mean least, we're not doing this because other people are doing it. But years after, when people's behavior started to change, there was another poll done, and people were asked, well, what actually changed your behavior? And by a large majority, it was the social pressure. It was the peer pressure that others were doing it. And we think it's a good thing because other people are doing it. Far different than what was imagined at the beginning. So never underestimate the fact that we are socially wired. We want to be we want to be social people. So now let's look. We talked a little bit about the brain, a little bit about people. We're going to dive into people a little bit different, but let's jump in. Let's back up a little bit into kind of our design efforts of systems, processes, and structure within a change process. What systems need to be changed? What systems need to be created are things that we need to look for as we design the change. We need to have a plan to address the impact to people and to the business. Sometimes we leave doors open. Sometimes we run parallel processes. We really need to close down the paths that our brains want to go down. If we leave dual paths, we are creatures that like to go to the path of least resistance, go back to what we know. I'm reminded of a change that when I worked in the steel industry, steel making, we automated our caster operation. And we provided lots of information. We trained everybody on the new way to ensure that they understood how to operate things, the automated caster. But we also left the manual operation. Guess how long it took for the caster operators to switch out of automation and go back to the manual operation the way in which they have always done it? A total of 3 days it took them to switch back. And that happened over the course of several months. We'd move them back to automation, they'd switch back to manual. And one might say, well, that's a leadership responsibility to make sure they don't do that. Well, the fact is that they never really understood. There was always a reason that they wanted to switch back to manual. And a lot of times it was a justified reason. So what we didn't do is we didn't really engage them in the process up front, right? And understand, how is everyone going to work together? How are the different operational divisions and departments within our organization operating together? What is causing all this switching back and forth? So eventually we navigated through all of that and were able to shut off that parallel process and not allow it to be operated in manual any longer. Sometimes restructuring how we work and who we report to helps, depending on the impact of the change and the size of the change. Sometimes facility redesign. Our brains and our organizations, as I said earlier, are creatures that like the path of least resistance. So let's talk a little bit about leadership and culture. While structures and systems will get us part of the way, leadership and culture help to create the new normal. This is the new way that we're going to work. It's also part of the design phase of change. And we think about the leadership scaffold. We like to think about a teaming approach, building a unified front, fostering team and departmental realignment and collaboration, rather than a siloed approach in organizations. I know I've personally experienced that through change, that when departments aren't realigned and there's not consistent methods and formal methods of communication, they tend to be siloed, and it tends to create more resistance because there's no cooperation and collaboration between those. Change is the new normal for not only us, but probably for you and for all of our organizations. And we need to enable our workforce to be resilient, upskilling their capability, not only to be part of the change, but to lead the change as leaders. Are we benchmarking? We've got to go beyond just managing the resistance, but we also have to make sure that we change ourselves. You guys, I'm sure, are aware of Mahatma Gandhi, who made the statement, "Be the change that you want to be." Leadership needs to embrace the change, to communicate it. How are they going to lead? How are we going to lead to the change? How are we going to measure performance differently than we have in the past? And certainly, how are we going to recognize and reward those that step up? When we as leaders put it in the forefront of our mind, our people will follow. What we talk about, what we act upon, sends the message about what's important to us, and people will follow that. What we don't talk about and what we don't act upon people tend to ignore because the perception is that it's not important if they're not talking about it and they're not acting upon it. So where has leadership put the conversation? Is it front of mind to the employee, to the managers, to the supervisors, or is it behind the curtain, as we stated earlier? Are we talking about the safety benefits of the change? Are we talking about who we hire and how we promote and how we train and how we are resourcing this new change? How the plans fit for purpose and all of the things that we do as leaders, that you do as leaders, to help build that scaffold of support of the change. Show up as the change you want to be. When it's difficult, which it will be, I promise you, if you've not been through, I'm sure you all have been through a very difficult change in your life in some way. I'm not sure that you've all been through a disruptive technology change, but it will be difficult. There will be missteps along the way. It'll be difficult for you as a leader. I know it has been for me in the past. But there's always the opportunity to call on a colleague, to call on someone that can help coach you and get you through that change and provide you pointers and provide you their experience in the same or similar change. And in order to build the culture scaffold, we have to have knowledge of the culture, as we stated. Some people say you simply, in the technology era, you simply need to do a technology acceptance assessment. But we'd say that you need to go further than that and really assess your culture on a greater level, because your culture predicts and often determines how people will accept change. Culture has roots that will impact everything. I'm reminded of an example. You may be aware of a technology that we use at Caterpillar. It's an in-cab fatigue monitoring technology that monitors eyelid closure for off-highway truck operators. And we had an installation with a customer in 2 different countries, same organization. But the installation and the deployment of the technology was managed in 2 very different ways. The cultures of these 2 sites were different. The management of change process that was implemented to ensure the success of the technology was far different. And I can say that you could probably only imagine that the results were far different. The tampering, the destruction in an organization that had a not very good culture, in an organization that didn't manage the change effectively, that did not educate, that did not help the people learn, that did not inform, that did not inspire people and help them understand what's in it for them. The results were far different than the organization that had a great management of change. Same technology, same company, 2 different sites. Peter Drucker, a culture change guru, has often been quoted as saying, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." For your change to be successful, please make sure that your strategy is underpinned by your culture. Enable your communication strategy to be successful and help ensure the success of the change. As you see in this diagram on the slide, there are certain, you can look at this diagram in many different ways. It's strategies of change, it could be strategies of leadership, but certain times call for certain responses. But as you can see, as we become more collaborative, we can tend to gain more commitment around change versus being more directive. We tend to get less commitment. Obviously, collaboration takes a little bit longer. So as a strategy, you build around what's the timeline for implementation. And throughout the review of that timeline, you can really understand what's the approach we need to take. Where do we need to collaborate? Where do we need to direct? Where do we need to facilitate? You may want to move more aggressively on your change, but your culture will help or hinder you in your efforts. Will your chosen strategy align with the outcome that you're seeking? The state of culture depends, it always will determine the speed of the change, the state of your current culture. So keep those things in mind as you set out your strategy. And that strategy needs to be supported by a communication plan. But as we stated earlier, information is not enough. We also need a very in-depth learning plan. We also need a reinforcement plan to reinforce those that are doing things right. And all stakeholders need to be involved. But to make it all work, we need people. We need to build the capability and enable them. Not only those that work for us, but we need to enable ourselves. And for us, we call it accountability. People need to clearly know what is expected of them. What we expect of them, we need to know what we expect of each other as leaders. We need to be equipped with the training and the resource to be able to work in the new way successfully. Someone needs to pay attention to what and how we do it to ensure that we know what good looks like. And we need feedback. If we're doing things well, positive recognition for a job well done, and coaching when performance doesn't align with expectations. In our world, we call it accountability. The only effective way to hold someone accountable is to ensure that you set them up for success. But accountability, again, isn't only for them, it's also for us. And engaging them into the process through involving them and integrating and informing. All too often, our people have change done to them as opposed with them. To make change stick, we must get our frontline involved. We must get our middle levels of our organization involved if we want our change to be sustainable. We can engage them in the 4 doors of conversation, as I talked about earlier. They can answer the questions. We need to answer these questions. Am I going to be retrained? Is my job going to be different? How is it going to be different? We need to integrate the thoughts of the front line, their ideas, their opinions, and act on them. We need to inform and communicate with them effectively. When we incorporate change, we involve and include parts of the workforce that will tell you, let me tell you what's really happening and what the people are really thinking. All too often, folks, we've seen customers grab folks that are going to support everything, and we say that's great. We want folks driving the change that are supportive, but you also need a couple of filters on those teams, a couple of filters that are in that process that can say, here's how things really are happening on a day-to-day basis. Rogers' innovation adoption curve displays it this way. Starting on the left-hand side, you've got 2.5% that are innovators, and you got more that are early adopters. You've got an early majority, a late majority, and you've got the laggards. Oftentimes we call them the drivers, the doers, and the draggers. Everyone will adopt or adapt at their own pace. As we stated earlier, your history as an organization, your history with change will determine some of this. But you can't wait on everyone. I've had people ask me, well, when's the right time to do this? When will we be ready to do this? And I've often told them, if you wait for yourselves to be ready, you'll never get there. Former change management strategies focus on all the resistance, but we say focus on those that are behind you, that support, that drive. An example a colleague informed me of just yesterday was, think about a school of fish. As that school of fish changes direction, the fish that are in the very back don't know that the direction is changing until they're at that point. They follow, they see what's in front of them, and they follow what's in front of them. People want to be part of a tribe, just like fish. Peer pressure is very powerful. So if you pull folks in that you can leverage that are driving the change, make sure that's part of your strategy. And it goes beyond being a one-time event. Having a continuous improvement process that helps you move closer to success, that ensures that long after you're gone, this change is going to be sustainable. And having a process that repeats itself over and over and over again is very important. It measures the success of the change. It identifies and develops countermeasures. It creates and defines ownership. It continuously uncovers the reality of what's going on in your organization. So I would ask you today, if you're interested in really developing a strategy that unveils the human element, highlights the human element, and gets the human element involved in the change, we'd be happy to help you. And I'll leave you with this. a game of head and heart, logic and emotion. It's not something that comes naturally to everyone. It didn't for Caterpillar either, but we're here to help you and be your partners in change. And now I ask, are there any questions? And if you would please use your Q&A function online to submit any questions.
It looks like we have some active listeners. We did have some questions come in during the presentation. The first question that came in was about autonomy. So with autonomy and other disruptive technologies on the rise, how do you see the human element changing in the mining industry?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Obviously, there's an impact on the human element, but I don't personally, and at least in my experience to date and the knowledge that we've been able to attain, humans are always going to be needed. Does the way they work change? Obviously, in an autonomous environment, the answer to that would be yes. If you install autonomy on your load and haul sector of your mine, then you won't have highway truck operators anymore, but people still need to operate those vehicles just in a different way. So there always will be a need for people. But I see the way in which those people work and interact with technology and interact with each other are the things that will change. Great question.
Thank you so much, Brett. Thank you, audience, for that great question. Another question that came in. So if you are working for a company that needs to or maybe wants to adopt new disruptive technologies and they're not ready, how do you deal with that? And with those companies that don't feel ready, how do you know when the time is right to implement a disruptive technology?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a tough one. I don't know if there is one right answer for that question or a right answer. Being ready is going to vary. I'm not sure that any organization, depending on the level of disruption, if it's a small change, then small change in technology or a small change in the organization, you may feel that you're ready and because the impacts are minor, but something that's large, I don't know if you ever get ready for it. I think you can build the team, build the strategy, build the plan, identify. That would be my suggestion. If you want a kind of a ready, set, go kind of process, then define the vision and work through the strategy. You work through what does that strategy look like from the components that we've talked about today, our communications, our learning, right, our reinforcement plan. How are we going to team and engage our workforce in building out the remainder of these processes and helping them define the way that they'll work throughout the processes. And once you have that plan in place, I'd say that would probably be the point that you might say, okay, now we're ready to go with the start of the change.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Brett. Looks like we have some really good listeners today. We have another question that came in. And this question is about fear. So in your experience with disruptive technologies, where do you see the biggest fears in an organization while they're trying to implement a disruptive technology?
Very, very good question. And it's always important to understand where that fear is, because that's typically where you will see the resistance as well. But I'd say hands down, the majority of the fear in disruptive technologies, especially when it changes the way people work, is going to come from your frontline workforce. That's where we've seen it come from because that's who it impacts the most. And so that's typically where we see. But it's not the only place we see fear. I see leaders a lot of times fear letting go. As you build your strategy, as you've identified, here's the technology, here's the systems and the processes, There's a component of leadership letting go of the reins of the change and engaging and deploying and supporting and sponsoring others to help drive that change throughout the organization. And sometimes that's a difficult thing. But it's important as leaders that we are able to identify what we commonly refer to as opinion leaders within your organization. They may not be positional leaders, but they could be very opinion and influential leaders in your organization. And if you're letting go, if you need to let go as a leader, it's really, really nice to have those types of people working for you that you can engage and hand things over to them. And they can become very influential into the ranks of your mid-management, your supervisory levels, and your employees. I hope that answered your question. It's kind of a long-winded answer.
No, it's good. So that question sparks another question. This question, if you're an employee and you're feeling like leadership is forcing change as opposed to involving you in the change, it can make you feel discouraged, and sometimes it can lead to less commitment to the change. So in that situation, how do you manage your emotions to deal with this change properly while also getting your work done effectively?
Laura, you cut out on me the very beginning of that question, so I didn't hear it completely. Could you repeat it, please?
Yeah. So as an employee, if you're feeling like leadership is forcing change as opposed to involving you in that change, it can make you feel often discouraged, and like you said, there's less commitment to change. How do you manage your own emotions to deal with this change properly while also continuing to do your work effectively?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's also a difficult one because it varies from person to person. As we stated earlier, each person navigates change at their own pace, as we showed the Rogers adoption curve. And so I think a high level of emotional intelligence is important when it comes to managing your own reaction to change, understanding the greater context of why the change is there, even if you feel it's being forced on you. I would venture to say that leaders don't decide to make changes just to disrupt their organization. Right? We often say in our safety world and in the work that we do that nobody came to work today to get hurt. So employees don't make decisions. No one makes a decision to perform an unsafe act because they want to injure themselves or injure someone else. I'd say that same paradigm exists with leaders. They don't make change just to disrupt their organization. There are benefits in the change. And so I would suggest to an employee that's struggling on adopting change but still getting the work done is start asking questions. Tell the truth about how you're feeling. Ask those questions about those 4 doors that we talked about earlier. Maybe if a leader's not coming to you, maybe you can go to the leader to say, help me answer these questions and understand the answers to these 4 questions so that I'm able to process the feedback and be able to determine my path as an employee. Hopefully that answer too. That's a difficult question, but a good one.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. We had another question come in, kind of in the same realm. So during the engagement process, as different people get involved, is that change process, does it have to come from just the supervisors or managers, or are there other support departments like human resources or site leadership that can be helpful in getting that through?
Yeah, good question. We like to say, or like to use, and our experience shows us that it's the most effective way. It's more of a teaming approach. It's not a single department or a single supervisor, but it's kind of a cross-functional team approach in certain ways, right? You may have a specific subject matter expert team that's working in a specific department that's trying to figure out how that change impacts the department. And you may have a team that does that, but then that team may interact with another team that's in another department, right? And then we like to kind of go one level higher than that and kind of create maybe a steering team, a guiding team or guiding coalition, if you will, of the change. This may be cross-functional with various subject matter experts. It's got various leaders on it. You've got executive sponsorship for that team. And then on those teams is where you would have as well some of those filters within your organization that says, no, let me tell you how it's really happening. Let me tell you what the opinions really are of the people. And we find that approach of creating teams and building teams and letting them involve, inform, and integrate, and letting the messaging and the communications and even some of the decisions on how things are going to be done, letting them come from those teams, because all of those teams are made up of representatives from various segments of the business, various departments or crews or whatever the case might be. And they become champions. If they're involved in that change, they become champions for the change to their peers, maybe to folks they play golf with that they work with as well, maybe folks they fish with, maybe folks they go to church with, maybe folks that they interact with outside of work, and that they can drive and be a champion for that change. So sum all that long answer up. We suggest a teaming approach. It's not a single department typically, but when you build cross-functional teams, you'd be amazed at some of the things that they can come up with and decisions they can make that, in my experience, are far better. Back before I was consulting, back when I was working in industry, specifically doing environmental health and safety work, when I created teams, they always came up with better solutions than I could have ever dreamed of myself. Great question.
Yeah, great answer. Thank you, Brett. We had another question come in. This is about the culture of an organization. Would you recommend assessing the culture of the organization, its ability to adapt to change before actually implementing that disruptive technology? And second part of the question, could you talk about if Caterpillar helps do that?
Excuse me, great question. I like the last one really, right? We have a very inquisitive group today, so that's great. Yes, the short answer is yes. Before you implement a change, depending on its level of disruption, I won't sit here and tell you that if it's something that you feel is minor and you've assessed the impact that a change will have, or a small technology, even though earlier I said never underestimate the impact of a small change. So I think as long as you've done a good job, it's not always necessary if it's something that you feel is minor as an organization. But definitely, if you feel that there is significant impact that a change is going to have to your organization, such as autonomy, right? Major disruptive change, then yes, it would be prudent to evaluate your culture, assess where you are, assess where people are with their views of technology, how adaptive or receptive to change and a new technology they might be. Maybe it's even the specific technology that you're going to implement. There's a psychological aspect to asking people what they think and then acting upon the things that they tell you and doing it in a positive way. There's a huge psychological benefit. And in an employee's mind, as we talked about the question of employees, rather than now I'm not feeling that the change is being forced upon me, then I've been engaged at the very beginning. Even before we made the decision, I was engaged. But I would also say if you do a cultural assessment or a technology acceptance assessment, be ready to act upon the results you get. Because the failure to act or include that or involve those results into your strategy might be detrimental to the change.
Great, thank you, Brett. We have a follow-up question to that question. So it sounds like trust is an important part of building that culture. Can you talk a little bit about some ways that you can start to, if you know that trust is an issue, some ways that you can build trust with a team that's maybe getting ready to implement disruptive technology or maybe in the process of implementing disruptive technology?
Yeah, great question, and I would agree. Trust is a big part of it, and your history as an organization, maybe your individual history as a leader, looking back and understanding, have we made promises in the past that have been broken? How have we implemented technology in the past or implemented change in the past? Understanding the history is really important to being able to predict the future. And in this case, how much trust do I have in the organization, or how much trust do I have with my particular team? Someone once said, I don't remember who, but said it's impossible to build trust by focusing on trust. You must build trust by focusing on things that create trust, like being honest. Being honest about failures as a leader, being honest about our mistakes in the past, being honest about that we're changing our direction, showing that you care through involving people, asking them their opinions, their perceptions is a way to involve and engage them as well. And then letting them be part of the solution creation. As we showed the equation earlier, the quality of the results is the quality of the solution times the acceptance. And if I can help build trust, then, and I do that through engaging them and building a better quality solution, it will automatically help me increase my level of acceptance. And sometimes the solution may not be 100% exactly how you would have built it. But if I have 85% of my organization that will accept a 98% quality solution, I can do the math versus 25% of my organization that will actively accept a perfect solution. The math's pretty easy to do. And I know which one I would pick. I'd pick the higher acceptance. And of course, that's variable depending on what it is that you're implementing, right? Some changes require perfection when it comes to technology because of safety reasons, because of operational reasons, and those types of things. But typically, those are the things that are within the physical device itself, and that stuff typically is perfected. It's the people and the engagement and the involvement and helping to build trust with them that makes the impact far greater. Hopefully I feel like I didn't answer that question effectively, but hopefully I did, because I don't have anything else to provide you.
No, that was wonderful. That was good. So that's our last question that we had come in. Thank you so much, Brett, for taking time to answer those questions, and thank you everyone for listening attentively and for submitting your questions. We really appreciate your participation. So I just wanted to thank all of you for taking time out of your day or afternoon or evening to spend time with us on our workshop on the human element in disruptive technology. So thank you again. We really appreciate you being here. If you'd like to know more information about safety or about Caterpillar Safety Services, please visit cat.com/safety for more information. Or if you'd like someone to follow up with you, please email Valerie Thiel. That's Thiel_Valerie_J@cat.com, and she will follow up with you. We also have a QR code on the screen. If you'd like to receive more information about Caterpillar Safety Services, disruptive technology, please scan this QR code by opening up the photo app on your phone. And when you take a picture, it'll open up a short form that you can fill out, and then we'll be able to connect you to the people or the resources that you're looking for. Thank you again, everyone, for tuning in. We've enjoyed having you here for our workshop on the human element in disruptive technology. We hope that you have a wonderful and safe week. Thank you.